Well, Tyler, welcome to Crossing the Line. I've been looking forward to this since the conversation with Brian Cook when he was on our podcast, and he thinks an awful lot of you, Tyler. He sure had a lot of great things to say, and he built you up. I just want you to know, and we are excited to have you. Welcome to Crossing the Line.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Excited to be here, and hope I don't disappoint.
You're not. I guarantee you're not going to do that. And we do appreciate you taking. I know you're a very busy doctor, tons of things going on in your life, professionally and personally. So this is listen, important to us that we make sure that we hear your story, because your story is worth hearing. But we also want to be good stewards of your time. So thank you so much for giving us a bit of that. Hey, let's jump right in and learn a little bit about Tyler the man. No, Tyler. Let's learn about Tyler the boy. Let's go back to, let's say around 8 years old, and we're going to get to all that you've accomplished. And we talked about that in the intro, and we talked about who you are now. But I want to talk about who you were then. So
Sure.
so let's go back to 8 years old, a day in the life of Tyler, and when he was 8. Talk to us about, where did you grow up? What was your life like, and what kind of home did you grow up in?
Sure. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and had a great home with great family. Have two parents who loved each other and loved us, their kids well. I have two younger sisters, and I'm the oldest of three. I had a very, I guess, kind of classic American childhood. I, went to school, to public school. I was able to ride my bike to school. We were that close. We also lived near a neighborhood pool, and so every summer was spent all day, every day at the pool. There was a creek that ran through our neighborhood, and I spent a lot of my days with my friends in the creek, catching crawdads, building forts. Just kind of playing. Had a great childhood of just a lot of time just playing with friends and playing, sports, soccer, baseball, swimming. All these things were just very much a part of my life. I remember we also, in Huntsville, we lived in the Jones Valley area. So there's a big farm right next to our neighborhood. And so while we had all the amenities of the city, there's also a big farm in the middle of the city. And so we would go underneath the barbed wire fence and play in the farm and in the creeks there. And so whether that was cow patty fights or whatever it was, we had a fun time just kind of growing up, kind of in the country, kind of in the city, all at the same time, and had a really, really good childhood that way.
Wow, it sounds like you did have a wonderful childhood. As you were growing up, think about some of the things that your parents taught you, or that you experienced. Obviously, things are a little bit different today, or for me, a lot different than how I grew up. But the values are the same, right? And those things that we learn, especially with you having the opportunity to grow up in a farm area and that kind of thing. How did it mold you? How did it give you values perhaps that you use today? What did you learn?
So I think there's several things. One thing my parents taught me was just hard work, whether
Mm,
that was through school, like working hard, trying my best to succeed. They didn't necessarily expect me to be perfect, but they expected me to try my best.
mm,
And so I think that was something that was an important value that they taught me. One thing that they also gave me a lot of as from a fairly young age, and I think this kind of grew with me, was a lot of freedom to explore on my own, and kind of mentioning that we had the farm that was close by, or the creek or the pool, and just the ability to ride our bikes around the neighborhood without a lot of parental oversight. There was probably more than I realized now, but we had a lot of opportunities to be on our own and to experience things on our own. Both to succeed, to get into trouble, to do good things, to fail at things, and I think that experiential learning of just being left to be exposed, I think had some benefits. As I grew up and did things later on, I think a lot of the independence that I was able to learn as a child helped me in doing things down the road. And my parents, where they were not, too overbearing with their care for me early on. They were definitely very careful, I think, but I think that helped as well. I think there was a foundation of a faith in our family. Also, we grew up going to church. Church was a very important part of our life. We grew up reading Bible stories, praying at night together. My dad taught Sunday school in this local church, and so we were always at church on Sundays and Wednesdays. And I think having that exposure to the gospel
Mm,
at an early age taught me a lot. I didn't always understand what that meant,
right.
but some of the values taught through the Bible, but also just the idea of faith in the gospel and the saving grace of Christ, I think also began to take root in me at an early age. And I think also through that, the idea that we are called to love others became a very important part
Mm,
to who I am as well. And that I think a lot of that came through my exposure to the gospel, and whether that's through church camps, mission trips, and just the day in day out learning about who Christ is and what He's done for us, and how we should then love others. I think was a really important part of my childhood as well.
wow, that's amazing, and something that I'm afraid we may be on the verge of losing, and that is, with the church affiliation and church attendance, and this seems like a rapid decline today. We're losing that foundation of faith, I'm afraid, for our families and our children,
Mm-hmm.
and it played such an important role for you. You said one thing that intrigued me that I want to ask about. You
Sure.
said that your parents gave you the freedom to explore, but
Mm-hmm.
also the freedom to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember as a teenager, or as a young adult, or as a child, when you were still under your parents home, in their home, under their authority? But do you remember a time when you failed? Did you remember what that's like, or could you share that?
I guess I could think of a few things when I was really, I guess, you know, younger. Failing looked like just disobedience,
Yeah.
and I think one thing that whether that was disobedience with not coming home when we were supposed to, or even just being mean to other kids in the neighborhood, things like that they would find out about and then correct me in that
Mm,
early disobedience. I learned that, hey, the more I'm disobedient, the less freedom I have, the less opportunities you give me. And when I am obedient, when I do follow through with what you've instructed me to do, that begets more trust and more freedom.
mm.
Um, I think um, I, trying to think what other kind of failures would have occurred. Um, I don't really have any major specifics. I think there were times within whether that was through like sports activities and not doing well in those kind of things, and like they let me try, and then they see I don't like doing this activity, and then failing
There
at
you go.
that, they let
Yeah.
me do in that situation. um I don't have any other specific things right now though.
I know. I love that. I think sports is a great example of learning that we can fail and not be a failure.
Right.
And you tried this, and it wasn't for you, but that didn't make you a failure. And I'm
Right.
I'm sensing that as we go through your story and we get to where you had an unexpected adventure, I think possibly,
Hmm.
I think that when things don't turn out the way you think they're going to, you have to have that ability to push through that, right? Ability
Right.
to
Right.
continue to know, okay, I can overcome that. Just because it's not what I thought it would be doesn't mean that I can't still be what I need to be or who I need to be, or I can't even navigate that. I can, and I can. It gives you that flexibility not to be so rigid of things have to be a certain way.
That's
And
very true.
we'll talk about that in a minute as we go through this. So, all right, Tyler. So here we go. You're headed into now you're headed into college. Now, were you an athlete in high school, or were you more, because you're a doctor, and were you a nerd? I mean, who were you? I just need to know.
I lived in this weird in between place. I was an athlete. I was a starting fullback in high school.
Oh wow.
I wasn't great, but I was good enough. But I also I did musical theater, and so I did
Wow.
shows and things like that, and I kind of got into that world. And I also was very studious. I enjoyed learning and made good grades, and so I kind of had friends that were kind of the sports jock kind of friends. I had my theater thespian friends, and then I had my kind of nerdy, study friends. And I didn't ever feel always that I belonged to any of them, but I definitely had friends in all those different areas. And um, yeah, I was, and I also have my friends from church, and that they some of those overlapped and some of them didn't. But those were kind of
Right.
where my areas of friends came from.
Well, that's awesome. The singing fullback. So we need you to sing for us. No, that's awesome. So we're headed in your life. We're headed to college. Talk us through, where'd you go to school, and then tell us kind of what began to happen in your head and your heart
Sure.
to kind of to help us to understand your passion not only for medicine but for mission. So tell us about that.
Sure. So I actually might even start go back to in high school with our church. We started going on mission trips locally or within the U.S. and had several experiences through mission trips and working with children in different kind of inner city areas of the country. And it
Mm.
was really just I loved being with kids. I really enjoyed the interaction there, and began to just have more passion towards children and caring for children and taking care of kids who came from rougher areas or rougher backgrounds. And so I ended up deciding to go to Samford um, and with Stanford University. But that spring, I decided that the summer before college, I wanted to go on an adventure. I didn't have a lot of criteria for that adventure as far as where or what, but I wanted it to be an adventure where I could also help people. And so
Mm.
my thought was an adventurous mission trip was what I envisioned for the big trip before my college started. And so in doing that, I really had no idea how to make that happen. I had another friend of mine who was kind of interested in doing the same thing, and so we started looking at different trip options that might be available to us. And the church I was attending at the time did not have a lot of opportunities for international missions, but I did want to go overseas to do this. And so I started, looking around and ended up going to a missions conference at a friend's church where they had a list of all the mission trips that were sponsored through their church's sending organization, and those that list had rankings of difficulty for all of their trips. And it wasn't just an overall ranking, but it had categories of the physical difficulty, the social difficulty, the psychological, spiritual difficulty. And I kind of went through all of that. And I went and I found the hardest trip I could find. And I said, all right, I'm going here. And I had no idea where here was, but it was to a place called Puerto Alegria, Peru.
Mm.
And it was in the Amazon jungle in Peru. And so um, at that time, I never considered Peru. I read about it in my history books and things like that, but never given much thought to the country. And I found this trip, but I didn't know how to get there. So I ended up calling the sending organization, which was Mission to the World, Presbyterian missions organization. And I called up Mission to the World and said, hey, how can I get to this place? And they said, well, there's this church from North Carolina going this summer. If you want to give their team leader a call, maybe you can join their team. And so I randomly cold called this person up in North Carolina
Wow.
and just said, hey, I've heard about this trip. I'd love to go. Can I join your team? For some reason, my parents said yes, that I could do this. For some other reason, the team leader said yes, and we made it happen. And so my one of my first experiences in Peru was this totally random trip with people I didn't know to a place I had no idea where it was.
Mm. Wow. So you parachuted into this place in the Amazon jungle of Peru with
Hmm.
somebody you didn't know. I mean, did a friend go with you, or was it just you and these
No,
people you did? How many people went with you?
I think it was probably a team of about 15 people, if I
And
remember right.
you didn't know them.
I didn't know them. We did have a few phone calls, like team phone calls beforehand. I think maybe two or three, but no, I basically met them in the flew to Charlotte, met them in the airport. That was the first time I
Unbelievable. All
met
right. So
them.
what happened? What was it like? Here you are. You're in the jungle. Did it live up to its name? Was it incredibly difficult, or was it a piece of cake?
It was both. It was interesting. So the trip was very different. In every way, I was taken out of my comfort zone.
Mm,
Obviously, I didn't know the place, I didn't know the people, but even just getting there was hard. We had a lot of troubles with our flights getting down there. We're delayed a day. We ended up flying to Argentina, then Chile, then back up to Peru to get there. During all this time, everybody else gets their luggage at the luggage rack, and mine never shows up. So I'm
wow.
now in the middle of the jungle with no luggage, nobody I know. I don't speak the language. I don't understand the culture. And on top of that, we're doing a lot of construction work, so it's hot, and so I'm getting, of course, soaking wet within 5 minutes of working and have no clothes to change into.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and then we're also working with children who have come from really tough places, and that was also just something I never experienced before or never really contemplated before. Again, I had a great childhood, and so my perspective was from my own experience as opposed to from these other terrible experiences that these kids had come from, whether that was from abuse, neglect,
Mm,
abandonment at an early age,
mm,
living on the streets from the age of 4 or 5,
mm.
and hearing these kids' stories and seeing and being awoken to that reality that existed was also very challenging. During that time. And so, just from a physical sense, it was very difficult. From that emotional and spiritual sense, it was very difficult. Again, language socially, it was very very challenging. But the cool thing about this trip was that through all that this through removing all of these comforts that I had depended on my entire life, I felt a closeness to God and to the
Mm,
work that He was doing there, which was, I think, necessary for me to experience.
yeah.
And I don't think I would have experienced that if I had all of these other comforts of people I knew or friends or clothes or anything
Right.
to depend on. I remember, going down to the place was on a river that we stayed, and there was a little floating dock down there. And every day, I actually had a pair of clothes in my carry-on bag. Thanks to my mom, she put an extra pair of clothes in my carry-on bag, so I had two pairs of clothes that I could change back and forth from. And every day, at the end of the day, I'd jump in the water with my clothes on, and I'd get out, change clothes, and I'd wash my clothes in the river because that was the place, all thing we had. And so, the boys there, probably 7 or 8 years old, were teaching me how to wash socks by hand. Of course, I'd never done before. And again, it was just a very eye-opening experience and challenging experience for me.
Goodness gracious. So the young boys, the street boys were showing you how to wash socks. And
Right.
that, I mean, that was probably a normal way of life for them, huh? And you're
Right.
there. So what, tell me, Tyler, when you finally, you worked through this, you left, what happened to you? What impression did that trip leave on you?
Sure. So I left during that trip. We heard from the director of the home and the ministry that was there, and there were just stories about the kids. And one of the kids had mentioned at one point that maybe it wasn't good for the gringos, the foreigners, to come down because they would form these great friendships and then they would leave again. And that was
Mm,
always really challenging for the kids who
mm,
had already had a lot of loss in their life to
yeah.
develop friendships and then lose them again.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I thought I remember very vividly walking down to the river. We're going to get on our boat to head back to the city. And I remember thinking, like, I want to come back to Peru, but not just to Peru, back to this very place.
Mm.
And I wanted to show those kids that I had not forgotten them.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing, Tyler. It changed your heart, didn't it? Touched your heart, didn't it? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you're reliving that right now, thinking about leaving those kids, but knowing in your heart, I'm coming back. I'm coming back.
Right.
That's beautiful. Wow, that's incredible.
Right.
So what happened next?
So I came back, and of course, I thought that I was so valuable at the
Mm.
time. I thought I could be such a big help. And I had a lot to learn about what helping really meant and about my own
Mm.
value in that whole process. But I came to Sanford, and Sanford at the time had a January term, and I thought,
Mm.
okay, I've got this whole month in January. I'm sure I can go back down to Peru and help in some way.
Right.
So I reached out to the director of the home and ministry and said, hey, I'd love to come back in January to help. Can I come? And they responded and said, well, do you speak Spanish? And I said, no. And they said, well, then you can't really help us. And they encouraged me. They said, if you really want to help, learn Spanish, then come back to us. And so I said, all right, I better learn some Spanish. So I started taking Spanish 101 for a semester at Sanford, and ended up taking a year and a half of Spanish. I did some study abroad in Spain and Costa Rica to try to get some really true immersion language learning so I could actually speak and not just read or write.
Mm.
And I actually tried to go on a trip to Peru one spring break, and that fell through my freshman year. And so it came time. It was January of my sophomore year of college. I was in Costa Rica doing a study abroad there. Again, I was like, my Spanish isn't great, but it's better than it was, and I want to get back to see these kids. And so I emailed the missionaries and said, hey, I have spring break this week. I'd like to bring a group of my friends down to visit the home on a short-term trip.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured that was the only way that I'd get down there during the time that worked for my schedule. Was like, I got to create my own team. I got to make this happen. And
Wow.
so they, again, for some reason, they said thought it'd be a good idea and said yes. I told them that I spoke Spanish now. I don't know. Again, my Spanish was not very good at the time. I guess it was good enough though. And I convinced Brian Cook and 7 other friends of mine, freshmen from Sanford or sophomores from Sanford to go that spring break on a trip to Peru.
Wow. And so you went back. How was it different, or was it different? You're coming back, you're in the same place. You see these children, different, same. What happened?
It was there was a lot of similarities. It felt very comfortable being there in the same place, and seeing those kids. The kids, they all actually they seemed to at least remember who I was, which I was kind of amazed by. I didn't expect
Wow.
that. But we had a wonderful trip. It was better in that nothing got lost and all the flights were on time, so that was good. And I don't know how much help we actually provided. I think in a lot of ways, these early trips was more for me than I did. I got much more out of it than I think any child or ministry ever got from us. But it was just really reaffirming to see these kids still there, still growing, developing, doing better than they had been prior to coming to this home. And so it was just a great experience to come back and to kind of complete that promise that I had made
Yes.
to myself, and to know that like I hadn't let them down. And they had never put that on me themselves. I had put that on myself, and I wanted to make sure that I lived into that.
So that freed you up. You made a promise. You
Hmm.
followed through. By the way, I can't help but think, you tried to get back a couple of times. It didn't work out. That's, let's go all the way back now. What you learned, from your parents of, hey, you know what? If you fail, it's okay. You get up and you try again. And if you
Right.
don't make it in this sport, you do that. Wow. So there's a great example of, from a leadership perspective, which, me, I'm kind of looking at it from a leadership perspective, but
Sure.
you learned about it. Look, if this doesn't work out, let's do it again. Let's try another one. And you kept persisting until you went back, you fulfilled your promise, right?
Mhm.
But that's not the end of the story. You didn't just fulfill it and say, okay, see you. What happens next?
So that kind of desire to continue to fulfill that promise kind of persisted. Again, I wanted to be someone who continued to help, continued to be involved with those specific children, to know that they were not forgotten, to know that somebody did care for them more than just people in their immediate lives. And so I went back that following summer. I interned for the ministry down there, and I basically what I did at that time was helping to lead their short-term trips over the summer. So I would basically meet a team in the airport, translate for them on their trips, and then
Oh,
take them back
wow.
to the airport. And then the next spring break came around, and everybody was like, "Hey, are we going back?" And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we organized another team. We had 23, 24 people come from Sanford, and then ended up going back the next summer as an intern again. And then the next spring break was my senior year, and I had everybody at this point was like, "Hey, let's go to Peru." And we took a team of about 37 people down to
Wow.
Peru, and just had tons of momentum and interest in wanting, and people that I knew and people that we had come with me and had met these kids and seen their situation, seen what was being done, that wanted to continue to invest and saw the value in going back to the same place and investing in the same people. So we got towards the end of my time at Sanford, and we started recognizing, hey, there's a lot of needs, there's a lot of issues that are here that we can't help in a short term 1 week trip as a group of college students. So we started. So me and a couple other guys, Brian Cook and several others, started saying, how can we make more of an impact when we're not here?
Mm,
And at that point is when we started to think maybe we should consider starting some type of organization to help specifically this home, to really support these kids, to provide better education, to provide better quality food, to help with their transportation. They were very isolated on a tributary of the Amazon. And so how can we meet some of these very basic needs? We have this group of people who are very involved and invested now. How do we keep them motivated and organized to support these children? And that's when the idea kind of first originated of forming Not Forgotten.
mm. Wow. So that's the whole idea was, you know, we need a sustainable way to impact these children. We need a way to do more than just 1 week a year or whatever. But it
Right.
all originated. We come all the way back to that first trip where you left those kids, and it impacted you so much that it drove this for the next 4 years. And then this vision emerged,
Right.
your vision that said, you know, I made you a promise I would not forget you here. And now I'm going to take it to a whole nother level. So
Right.
you had this vision of creating an organization called Not Forgotten. Tell us about
Right.
that.
Right. So again, as we started thinking about what we would do, or what we would call this, obviously that the idea that I first felt when I left the first time, that I did not want to forget these children, really kept resonating with me. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to have an organization that kind of spoke that said, not forgotten, that these children, these people are not forgotten. They may
Mm,
have been forgotten. They may have been forgotten by their parents, by their societies, by their communities, but they had not been forgotten by us and not by
mm,
God.
mm,
And so that was a big part of what we wanted to communicate through the name. And we had a lot of help. I was in med school at the time. I had no time to do anything. But people just would show up and say, like, "Hey, I'm a lawyer. I will start your nonprofit 501(c)(3) for you." And so we just had like all this free help that just showed up.
wow.
And God just kind of provided one step at a time for the needs that we would have as they came along.
Yeah.
And the other really really important piece to this that we haven't gotten to yet is that last trip that I went on my senior year. We met a new director, a new house parent had taken over, and his name was Gene Elet, and he's just an amazing man. And we developed a really close friendship over the many trips that I got to know him through.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that he had a true passion to see these kids succeed, to do well, to
Mm,
come out of their circumstances, to break the cycles of the abuse and abandonment they'd come from, and overcome that. And so I also had a partner down there who shared the same passion that I shared, but he was the boots on the ground, and he saw the needs day in, day out. And so we started also working very closely with him, and he would say, okay, our education here is poor. We're in a jungle school. Teachers don't come half the time. How can we provide better education? And we said, okay, let's hire our own teachers, and they can
wow.
come and do education in addition to what's happening in the school.
Mm.
And so we started working together in partnership to try to really help these children. And that was a really key part to this as well.
My goodness, providing education, partnering. I love that. You created a partnership. So tell us, where are we today? What is this ministry? What has it grown into? Kind of give us a here's where we are now.
Sure. So, see, it's been a long road, and I'll say, if even at this point where we are in the story, if you ever told me that we'd be where we are now, then I'd say no way. There's no way that's going to happen. And I think that's very true with this whole story. Is when I first went to Peru, I never had any dream of building an orphanage in Peru.
Mm.
But very, steps along the way, God has opened doors, God has provided, needs have arisen, and we've kind of walked faithfully into this. And so we continue to support the home that Jean was working in for many
Mm.
years. But over time, all the kids that I knew when they were 5, 6, and 7 were getting older. They were now
Right.
16, 17, 18. They were getting ready to graduate out of high school, and we were trying to think about the next steps for them. And we started realizing that a lot of things that they needed to succeed were not able to be taught in the model that existed in that home. It was a kind of a very traditional orphan care model. There, was 40 boys, 2 big dormitories, full of bunk beds. There was a director and his wife, and 1 or 2 helpers, and a cook. And
Mm.
that was meant to care for 40 boys, and they did a great job with the resources they had, but they needed more. These kids have come from really
Yeah.
rough areas, and they were meeting their basic needs of providing food. They were getting a very basic education. They were clothed, but beyond that, they couldn't really address, for example, the psychological issues that these kids have come through. They couldn't really address or help these kids to overcome learning disabilities because they didn't have the resources, or to really, if kids were behind, they didn't have the resources to really step up and
Right.
improve things to catch them up. And so we had, for example, this one kid who was just an incredibly talented kid, a great soccer player, very charismatic, and did okay in school. And we were trying to get him to apply to the military for like an officer's position, which was a series of tests and things. And he passed his physical test. He even passed his written test, and it came to time for the interview, and he bombed it. He could not look somebody in the eye in that type of
Mm.
setting and have a conversation,
Mm.
because he never had the opportunity to practice that or to do that, and his self-esteem was so low that put in that position, he just fell apart, which was
Wow.
terrible. And we started seeing that there's so much intangible that needs to be taught to these kids, so many intangible things that typically occur within a family, just within a family unit, that
Right.
kids learn from watching their parents, from watching their mom and dad interact to each other and towards their children, that these kids just don't see. There's definitely learning that occurs in a classroom and on a chalkboard, but there's so much more intangible things that need to be taught to children as they grow up. And we realized that there was a key component missing to this model, and that's the family.
Mm.
And so we started considering, we tried to work within that model for a while, putting band-aids and patches on things, but we felt like we were really just, patching holes in a sinking ship. And so we said, okay, if we cannot make this model work, we need to scrap it and come up with a whole new model. And we took experiences that we all had, both Jean, myself, as well as my wife. My wife is a social worker and has done a lot of work with foster care and international adoption. She spent a lot of time at the Big Oak Ranch,
Mm. Wow. That's
which
good.
is a home in Alabama for
Mhm.
children, and where they have a family model there. And so we took all of our experiences and tried to come up with a model that would work in the context culturally of Peru. And we ended up deciding to create a family style or family modeled home, where instead of having a big dormitory with lots of children and a few caregivers, we wanted to have multiple families living with a few kids in a small home in a community,
Wow. That's great.
together,
Mm.
with other support staff, so with social workers, with psychologists, with
Right.
teachers, to help really meet all of their needs in a very
Mm.
holistic way. And so over time, God provided the resources to buy land and get this thing started. And in 2000, I guess 2015, we were able to open our doors to our first
Wow.
children in our first location home called Las Lomas.
My goodness, that's amazing. And so now here in 2021, what does it look like?
So now we have two locations. We have a home in Las Lomas, which is about 100 acres outside the city of Iquitos, Peru.
Mm,
We have about 24 boys who live there now.
my goodness.
And that's where our kids, when they first come to us, when they're younger, usually they come between the ages of 5 and 11, average age around 7 or 8. They'll come to us and they spend their first probably 5 to 7 years in Las Lomas. And it's really a chance for these kids to regain their childhood. There's a lake, there's jungle, there's trampolines and playgrounds and farm. There's a whole farm of pineapples and papaya and bananas and all those kind of things where these kids can just be kids. They live with their mother and their father of a loving Christian Peruvian family. They go to school every day, but they come home to their families and they have a psychologist on staff to work with them on a weekly basis. They have a social worker on staff where they can really help meet some of those other social and psychological needs. And they have teachers on staff so that when kids come to us and they've not been in school consistently their whole lives, we can really try to catch them up to where they need to be and fill in gaps and show them that they can be successful.
Tyler, this is an amazing story, and eternity will tell the impact that your leadership has made on countless lives as that influence continues to, to grow like a ripple, like in the water. I can't imagine the lives that have been changed because of your passion. Your heart is so pure. Your passion is so evident. Your transparency is beautiful. Thank you for what you are doing. Thank you for allowing God to use that and to kind of well that up inside of you. And then you didn't just hold that, you executed. You went out and created a plan. That's leadership. Leadership is not just having a dream. Anybody can dream. You put that dream to fruition, and you did an awful lot of hard work, and you're still working, and you're still pursuing, and you're still loving these children and providing a way through your organization, not forgotten for countless generations to be impacted. I mean, think about that. I mean, just think about the children who will now have a shot at a healthy relationship and a healthy life.
Right.
What leadership, what a vision. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And I could talk to you all day, but our time is fleeting, and I can't let you get by out of here without talking about your treasure. I need to hear about your family. I need to hear about, tell us about your bride and those treasures and your children. Give us a
Sure.
little bit of tell us about who they are. Give us a little update on that.
Yeah, so my wife Allison, we actually met in Madrid, Spain. We were both studying Spanish abroad at Sanford, and it was a very a great story. We met in Spain. We were both studying abroad. We both had a passion for Hispanic children. She had spent summers
Mm,
working in Mexico
mm.
in an orphanage, and I'd been in Peru at that point, and so we really bonded over that shared experience and passion. And we became friends for several years before we started dating, and ended up getting married and, after halfway through med school. And now we have 3 children. We have 2 boys, Duke and Hardy. They're 5 and almost 3. And then we just had a little girl named Ivy, and she's about 3 months.
Oh, you have a 3-month-old. We
Three
may we
months.
may
That's
hear
right.
from Ivy on this podcast. Then who knows?
That's
That
right.
congratulations. That's awesome. So let me ask you this, and then I'll let you go. But your story is so incredible. If you were to address some of the aspiring leaders that are listening to this podcast, someone that's where you were back when you began to
Mhm.
have this vision and this passion, and that you allowed God to place in your heart and soul, tell them, what are some things that you could say that they would need, these
Mhm.
aspiring young leaders just trying to figure out who they are and where they're headed in today's culture? What would you say to them?
Sure. So I always tell people a lot of people want to make a difference in the world. They want the leaders, they want to make change, but they don't know where to start.
Mhm.
And they see that they may look at Not Forgotten and me, and they say, okay, how did you get here? And I always say, well, I didn't start with this idea to create an orphanage.
Mm-mm.
I started with a desire for adventure. I started with just a basic passion,
Mm.
two things: adventure and helping people.
Wow.
And I did that. And then I listened to the Lord's calling in my life. And the Lord spoke and said, "Hey, go back, don't forget." And so I think doing what you're passionate about, whether that's adventure or music or sports or anything, do what you're passionate about,
Mm.
and then listen to the Lord's calling as you do what you're passionate about,
Mm.
and follow that calling. And the Lord will provide one step at a time. It doesn't have to be big. There are many days when we were in the middle of this and we had no idea what the next step was. But taking small baby steps makes it a lot easier than trying to get from point A to point Z. And so uh, that's kind of the things I like to tell people, is to do one step at a time and do what you're passionate about.
Those are words of wisdom. So thank you for that. Follow your passion one step at a time, and listen to what God's telling you, and be open to where He
Right.
calls you. That's your story, and you have made an incredible difference because you have done just those things. And I can't thank you enough for sharing. We'll put in our show notes how to get in touch. We'll put the link to your website in the show notes so people can learn more about you and your incredible organization. um, God only knows the impact that you continue to make. So thank you for not forgetting. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for going back and giving to those precious children. You are an amazing man, amazing leader. And so thank you for sharing a little bit of your life story with us today, Tyler. It's been an honor to have you on Crossing the Line. And we hope maybe we can get an update from for your passion and what's going on in the future.
Well, thank you, Larry. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
Take care.
Bye.